Well, thank you very much, Julie Rendelman, for coming onto the show. Just want to talk to you about the breaking news, at least breaking yesterday, about what happened in the Trump probe. The New York Times' inside story about the resignations of two top prosecutors within the Manhattan District Attorney's Office. What was your reaction to the reporting of how that went down?
So I guess I would start with saying, where do we start? I'm not sure that I'm surprised, and the reason I'm not surprised is that if we remove the Trump part of this case and we just make this any investigation, it's not unusual when a new head prosecutor comes in that they're going to lose assistants that are under them. They lose them, whether it be they don't agree on their politics. The DA, in this case Bragg, wants his own people brought in to take over certain things. And so I don't think it's a shock when you see individuals resign. With that said, I think the shock is how quickly it happened after Bragg took office. I think that seems to be what my colleagues are talking about, is just how quickly this all came to be. He's only been there for 2 months, 2.5 months.
Right. And in addition to that, I think when the story first broke about their resignations, it was assumed before it was confirmed that essentially Mark Pomerantz and Carey Dunne, the line prosecutors, were essentially, they wanted to charge Trump with tax offenses, and that the DA was putting the kibosh, said, not so fast, I don't think that we can prove this case. The latest Times coverage pretty much confirms that that went down. Based on their reporting, what do you make of the DA's decision that essentially, based on what has been reported, this would have been a very difficult case against a former president?
So I'm going to say a couple of things. First of all, I don't want to be in a position where I'm attacking Bragg, because in the sense that we've heard these stories, we don't know exactly what has transpired. We certainly know that his predecessor, Vance, took the time to really review the case to make sure that they were going about it the right way. I think he even, and this story talks about the fact that he even brought in individuals familiar and experienced in this field of law to make sure that they agreed that they should be going forward with these charges. And in fact, I believe they even narrowed them down to pick that charge that seemed to be the most capable of getting a jury to convict. And so I don't think it's wrong of Bragg coming in January to not be in a rush to indict Trump without having his own thorough investigation as to what transpired. The question is he, and I think the question on everyone's mind is he saying the kibosh means that I'm not going forward, period, because we know that the grand jury was set to end in April? Or is he saying, I can't be on Vance's timeline, I have to be on my timeline? And my timeline is telling me I need to be able to cross the T's, dot the I's, to feel completely comfortable that this is the right move, and that at the end of the day, a jury will be able to convict based on the evidence we had.
And part of the timeline is determined, right, by the grand jury's clock. The clock is ticking. By April, they are going to have to excuse the grand jury and get another one. In terms of the evidence that they reportedly have, and I think you insert an appropriate note of caution here that none of us knows, this is just based on public reporting. It seems that what is said over and over again is we have a former president who famously doesn't use his phone, doesn't use emails, and that there are some tax records that may have even caused his accountant to cut ties with their authenticity. But no one, including his former trusted soldier, Allen Weisselberg, willing to go out there and say, he cooked the books other than Michael Cohen. Given that reporting, what side do you think has a stronger argument here?
Look, Adam, when we talk about the grand jury, you've heard that saying, you can indict a ham sandwich. And in many ways, it's true. You can indict a ham sandwich. It doesn't take much to get you indicted. It takes a whole hell of a lot in order to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that someone is guilty. And with Trump, it's not just about whether he cooked the books, it's also whether he intentionally cooked the books for the purpose of some level of criminality. And the problem is assuming that the evidence is what it is or what it is not, Michael Cohen was convicted of lying. So you have your main witness already being able to be cross-examined by, I'm sure, a very, very capable defense attorney that he has lied, and that he's been convicted of lying. So that's the first issue. The second big problem, as you talked about, is they can't seem to get anyone to flip. A lot of times when we have these extended grand juries, the reason we do that, and the reason I did that when I was in the office, is to try to subpoena records. It gives you a little more time, and to try to convince, whether it be subpoena or otherwise, individuals to get into the grand jury to testify in regards to what they know. They don't have that. And the emails that we talk about, I hate to think someone gets credit because they don't use emails or texts, but that does inure in his benefit because we don't have those smoking guns that we do in other cases where you see those emails of confessions left and right that the person never thought anyone would see. And so I think the case is difficult. I think everyone always thought the case would be difficult. The question is, do you go for it because you believe in the case and therefore let a jury to decide what the ultimate outcome should be? Or do you make a decision that we just don't have enough to go forward?
And as you mentioned, you're a former Brooklyn homicide prosecutor, and you've been privy to these behind the scenes discussions. What did you think about the kind of temperature that was described in that article? That this seemed to be the juice of many heated discussions inside the Manhattan District Attorney's Office. Did any of that resonate with the natural ebb and flow between line prosecutors and the people making the decisions?
It's a great question, Adam, and it depends. I think, as a homicide prosecutor, we did have some autonomy in regards to the decision-making practice. And keep in mind, Bragg, along with any head prosecutors that head up a huge office, they're not going to be involved in the day-to-day decision-making on every case. But when it comes to Trump and more serious cases, they are, or at least they're going to have those that they put in high-ranking positions that they trust to be a part of that decision-making. And so I don't think it's shocking to expect, especially something as political and as divisive as this case is, for there to be a lot of discussions. Keep in mind, by the way, even before Bragg came in, there were prosecutors in that office that didn't want to be involved because they didn't believe that there was enough to go forward. And so, it reminds me, look, we had experience in homicide, especially it brought me back to when we had the death penalty. We had to have meetings with 10, 20 people in a room where we had to either, for me, it was always to convince not to go for the death penalty because I was anti-death penalty. And lo and behold, we would have people who were against us go behind our backs and speak to the group before we got there in order to try to spin things. I mean, we're all human and everyone has their own agendas. And I don't think it's shocking that there's going to be a lot of, not everyone's going to agree. And I will add that you must keep in mind that the two individuals that were heading up this investigation are not, quote unquote, Bragg's people. And that is often what happens when someone comes in. They want their people to be around them and heading the investigation.
That's a very good point. In terms of, you are creating a podcast right now titled Without a Body, and it goes into what happens when a crucial bit of evidence is missing, namely a body in a murder investigation. In what sense, we're talking about the Trump investigation and the absence of very key evidence. There will be no text messages. There will be no emails. And from the looks of it, Allen Weisselberg is never going to flip. How, drawing from your experience and drawing from the passion that motivated this upcoming podcast of yours, how do prosecutors who believe in a case move ahead when key pieces of evidence are uncertain?
It's such a great question, and and you're killing me by letting me figure out how to answer it. And look, I had homicide cases. I remember I had a case that I spent 2 years before anything happened, just literally going through phone records. I became like the phone record nerd in my bureau, because I literally used them to put together, to try to figure out where the defendant was at one moment in time from years of phone records. And so, look, I hate to go with circumstantial direct evidence, and every case is different and every case can be proven in different ways. Unfortunately, sometimes they're just not. We may believe in a case. We may believe with every fiber of our being that an individual is guilty of a crime, but still never be able to get that piece. Now, what is that piece for Trump? I don't know. Is the piece a cooperator? Is the piece a confession? That's never going to happen, or at least not a one that isn't a pure confession. I don't know that we're going to ever get to that point where everyone's going to agree there's enough to go forward. I think there is a leap of faith sometimes when we believe in a case, that we present it to the jury, as long as we ethically believe that we have enough to go forward, and let that jury decide. And then sometimes we have to, I hate to use the word bail because that sounds like a failure, but in a sense, you have to make the decision that it's not the right decision to go forward.
Right. And on a deeper level, in a rule of law system, if you believe that you don't have the evidence, the choice to make is to not bring the case, correct?
Yeah, I mean, I think the problem is that you and I, or anyone else in the DA's office, can differ as to what that means. And so I may view something. A perfect example is, what do Trump's words mean when he says something? Some people talk about it just being hyperbole. Some people say they're confessions. Well, who's to decide what that means? Does a jury decide what that means? Does a judge decide what that means? Or do I and the people around me at the prosecutor's office make a determination that they believe that, based on the surrounding evidence, is enough to go forward? I mean, from Bragg's point of view, there have been questions that have surrounded this investigation since before he got there. And so I think I get it. I'm not sure that the timing, by the way, just on a side note, that the timing worked for him, considering everything else that seems to be going on. But I don't think there's a hard and fast rule about whether to go forward.
Well, thank you very much, Julie Rendelman, for coming on to the show. And because we are Law&Crime colleagues, I did have an advanced listen of your podcast, as you know. So I will recommend, when it launches, for all of our listeners to listen to it. Without a Body. It is excellent. And thank you again for coming on the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Adam.